Family members and survivors of the 1988 massacre, parliamentarians, colleagues, friends, may I begin by commending Reza Benai and his associates for organizing this annual commemoration. And it is an honor for me to join Reza and all those assembled here for this important commemorative assembly. To remember also Paul Duer for his exemplary courage and commitment. And I had the pleasure to work alongside him in common cause over so many years, and to thank Mrs. Duer for her moving remarks here today. Indeed, we meet at an important moment of remembrance and reminder, of bearing witness, and of taking action, where we remember the mass murder of thousands of Iranian dissidents in 1988, where we remember the unanimous resolution moved by Paul Duer and adopted by the Canadian Parliament, where these mass murders of Iranian dissidents were characterized as crimes against humanity, where there are no statute of limitations in respect of these crimes, where the resolution called on the international community to bring these mass murderers to justice and established September 1 as Iranian Political Prisoner Day in remembrance and reminder of the pain and plight of human rights defenders in Iran. Regrettably, not only have these mass murderers gone unpunished to this day, they've even been rewarded by Khamenei's regime, and they can even be found today amongst the architects of repression of the human rights of the Iranian people today. I refer to Mustafa Pourmohammadi, a former Minister of Justice who was a member of the Death Commission in 1988. To Sevyed Avari, the present Minister of Justice, also a member of the Death Commission in 1988. Ibrahim Raisi, the President Chief Justice, also a member of the Death Commission. It is a scandal that these and others have been rewarded for their criminality, and it is our individual and collective responsibility to see that they are brought to justice with all deliberate speed. Indeed, we meet today as we are witness as well to a relentless, intensifying, state-sanctioned criminalization of human rights in Iran, and a criminalization of those who would defend human rights in Iran, as Reza so brilliantly articulated in his opening remarks. A veritable criminalization of innocence, involving the criminalization of all fundamental freedoms in Iran, those protected under the Iranian Constitution, and a criminalization of all those who have sought and are seeking to defend these human rights, including the criminalization of women's rights, where in August alone, 9 women were convicted and sentenced to 109 years in prison for doing nothing else but peacefully advocating for women's freedom of choice, to unveil the hijab as part of that freedom of autonomy, for which they have paid the price of criminalization of these rights, the whole underpinned by what is a legalized gender apartheid in Iran. 2, the criminalization of environmental rights, where in a Kafkaesque maneuver that would make Kafka blush, environmental protection, so desperately needed and regarded as a universal right today, has been made a capital offense in Iran. And where 8 major environmentalists, as we meet, are subject not only to imprisonment, torture, and detention, but the risk of execution. 3rd, the criminalization of human rights defenders, like the iconic women's human rights defender Nasrin Sotoudeh, who has gone down the line in Iran for juveniles threatened with execution, for other women who have been imprisoned, for journalists, for other political prisoners, until she herself became a prisoner of conscience, where she was convicted on national security, trumped-up charges, and sentenced in her mid-50s, astonishingly enough, to 38 years imprisonment and 148 lashes for doing nothing else but being the embodiment of what human rights in Iran is all about. And as a kind of comment on the international human rights condition today, an embarrassing comment, 2 days after this outrageous sentence, Iran was elected to the UN Commission on Women's Rights. How is that for a culture of impunity? All one can say is shame on the international community for rewarding criminality. 4th, the criminalization of freedom of religion in Iran, as in the ongoing persecution and prosecution of the Baha'i community, let alone the persecution and prosecution of other ethnic and religious minorities. Number 5, the criminalization of freedom of expression, as in the escalating assault on media freedom and the arrest, imprisonment, torture in detention, and murder of journalists. And where in the wake of the recent first ever global media conference, global international conference on media freedom, co-sponsored by the government of Canada, Iran was numbered among the main jailers of journalists in the world today. Number 6, the criminalization of dual nationals, as mentioned also by Reza in his remarks, a shocking commentary on this state-orchestrated hostage diplomacy. Number 7, the criminalization of labor rights, including mass arrests and imprisonment of those engaged in nothing other than peaceful labor protests. Number 8, the criminalization of culture in the arrest and imprisonment of writers, artists, public intellectuals, and the like, the criminalization of education rights, in the imprisonment, torture, and execution of teachers in Iran, and in the arrest, imprisonment, and even execution of their students. And so I conclude with the calls articulated so compellingly by Reza in his opening remarks on behalf of all of us. Number one, we must sanction the architects of repression in Iran who continue to enjoy impunity. Two, we must place the IRGC in its entirety on the terrorist list of global terrorist organizations. Three, we must end the culture of impunity for the mass murder of the thousands of dissidents in 1988. Number four, we must put an end to the state-sanctioned culture of incitement that knows no borders and finds expression here on the streets of Ontario as well in the annual Al-Quds rally and the like. And finally, we must continue and never stop advocating for the release of all political prisoners, Iranian political prisoners, who are the real heroes of humanity, the heroes of our time. Where every victim, as Payam Akavan said in his moving remarks, where every victim has a name, every victim is an identity, every victim is a universe, as our sages tell us. If you save a single person, it is as if you have saved an entire universe, and that's what these human rights defenders in Iran are doing. But if you kill a single person, it is as if you have killed an entire universe, and that's what the architects of repression in Iran are doing every day. And so, as we are gathered here, we will remember, we will act, and we will never relent in our solidarity, in our standing together with the great Iranian people, in our search for justice, for human rights, for human dignity in our time, and we will take inspiration from the courage and commitment of the great Iranian people. Thank you.